Welcome back to r/neighbors from hell, where people share stories about their crazy neighbors. And if you're new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe to join our amazing community. And without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. The first one is titled, "It took 12 years, but I got my revenge today." Backstory: 17 years ago my ex and I purchased my uncle's house. It was in a good neighborhood, well maintained and not too expensive. Our only complaint was our creepy neighbor we will call Jimbo. Jimbo hated my kids for some reason, even though they were small and we were rarely home. Years ago my uncle planted anise bushes about 3 feet from the fence line around the backyard as a noise barrier and for pool privacy. I was meticulous in making sure the bushes were properly manicured and didn't encroach on the neighbor's property. I kept them fairly tall but below the roofline. These bushes had been a source of contention between my uncle and Jimbo for years and carried on after we moved in. This is important. Fast forward 2 years, my ex and I split, leaving me pregnant with 4 and facing what was going to be losing a child alone. This was much to Jimbo's delight. He seemed to take some twisted pleasure in my family's pain. He made sure my kids and I heard his snarky comments about my deceased child often. I couldn't afford to move and I was not willing to uproot my family because a gross old man was determined to show the world how much of a butthole he could be. He also continued to harass me about those bushes, but I soldiered on. I came home from work one afternoon to find my anise bushes destroyed on Jimbo's side and all the way across the back. They had been cut from about 8 feet down to about 3.5 foot, limbless stumps. Most of them were completely destroyed. It was very cold that day, causing many of them to shock and die. The rear neighbor said that Jimbo accessed our backyard and chopped them all down before she was able to stop him. The police issued a trespass citation from my property but said the bushes were a civil matter. So I took Jimbo to court to replace the bushes that were close to their former glory. Would have totaled about 8K. Lawyer fees, court costs, etc. came to around $12,000, but old Jimbo refused to pay, so I put a lien on his house. I have since remarried and moved to a different town. I put my house up for sale, but the market was crap, so it was listed for more than 6 months before I got a bite. I really didn't want to sell to an investor because I loved my neighbors, except for you know who, but desperation took hold and my house became a Section 8 rental. And a very busy one at that. The other neighbors moved away, leaving Jimbo and his misery to deal with the slumlord and his nutty tenants. I got a call 2 weeks ago from a lawyer working for a title company asking me to accept an offer to clear the lien on Jimbo's house so he can sell it and move away from the drug-infested neighborhood. I contacted my attorney and found out that the lien had been refiled a couple of years ago to keep it active, and with interest and penalties, Jimbo owed me over $16,000. I decided that I was not going to settle for the $1,800 they offered and that he could pay what he owed or deal with it. He threatened to sue me, but we all know how that was going to go. So today I picked up a check for $16,754 and signed a lien satisfaction document. It took a little more than 12 years, but the revenge on the evil Jimbo has been exacted and it feels so good. And Ripe Stars, I am curious, have you ever gotten any sort of revenge, even if it only was petty revenge, on one of your awful neighbors? Let us know in the comments if anything ever happened. And while you're at it, I would really appreciate it if you could like the video if you want to support my channel. Thank you so much in advance, it really helps me a lot and I appreciate your support. The next one is titled, "You called the SPCA because I don't have a doghouse?" Backstory: my wife and I moved into our first house before we turned 30. And we did it without borrowing money from family members or a co-signer. Something I was especially proud of since I grew up poor. To top it all off, when we bought the house, my wife was still in college going for her master's. The house itself was not super expensive, in fact we got it for a steal, but it was in a highly sought after historical part of town. And although there was no HOA, the entire neighborhood practically competed to keep theirs looking the best. Other than when I was a child in the 60s and 70s, it is the only neighborhood I have ever lived in where I knew almost everyone in the entire street. Since the advent of cable TV, that is pretty rare these days. Our house was on the end of the street and there was a church behind us. My wife's grandmother lived across the street, which was a major blessing. Instant babysitter for our daughter, plus we could help look after her in her old age if need be. So we only had one next door neighbor who I shall refer to as Claudia, a Karen with a pinch of Nazi Gestapo, not in a racist way, but well, you will see. Claudia absolutely hated us with a passion. She was in her early 60s, came from money and spent the majority of her free time complaining about us. Either to the other neighbors or directly to us, and then the other neighbors she had to make sure everyone knew what trash we were. It was always some piddling BS like, sure, their grass was cut and edged, but not to neighborhood standards. She had appointed herself as the neighborhood's would-be HOA Nazi, except that all of her focus was exclusively on us and how we were screwing up. My wife and I had a dog before we moved in, who I shall call Jojo. She was an awesome dog, half Labrador, half Cocker Spaniel, medium-sized and super smart. I had taught her about 7 or 8 different tricks. During the day, while we were all gone, Jojo stayed out in the backyard. The impetus: one day, a rainy day, I come home to find a government notice on our front door from the SPCA. A fairly seriously worded notice that summarized to, "Get a doghouse or else we will take your dog." Since our backyard cannot be seen from the street, I immediately suspect where this was coming from. So I call the SPCA and speak with a really nice young man, and he explains that it did come in from a complaint, but he was not allowed to say who. I tell him I already know who would have complained, but I'm wondering why the notice seemed so harsh. There was real emotion in the way it was written. At first he sticks to the "we cannot say who called" thing, but then breaks down pretty quickly and admits it was Claudia, as well as the fact that he was the one who wrote the notice. "Man, she was actually demanding that I take your dog. I wrote it that way just to appease her so I could leave." No kidding? That's effed up, I thought to myself. Now here's the thing. Jojo already had a doghouse, a really nice one that my wife and I paid almost $300 for. I explained to the animal control officer where it was and mentioned that he didn't see it because it is tucked away on the opposite side of the house, but if he goes to the opposite side of our front yard, there is a crack in our fence he can look through to see it. He tells me, "That is completely unnecessary." He believes me, but he says that he's not so sure that that will satisfy our neighbor. Later, my wife says we should just move the doghouse to where Claudia can see it and that will solve our problem. But by this point, my blood was up. This was the last straw. You know, if she wants to call us white trash or gossip to our neighbors, I wouldn't have cared. But you just don't F with a man's dog. It would have been one thing if she had called the SPCA out of genuine concern for the dog. I could have forgiven her for that. But we knew she hated the dog too. She had either told us so or again complained to neighbors. No, I thought, this is going to call for a different approach, the compliance. The next day just happened to be Saturday. So my daughter, she was 5 or 6 at the time, and I made a trip to Home Depot. I took my daughter because I wanted her input and had her choose several items. I also asked if they had any wood scraps. But we lucked out. Once back home, I proceeded to build the ugliest doghouse in the world, complete with a day-glow green paint that was just slapped on. We then placed it in the corner next to her yard. We shared a fence that wasn't much for blocking the view of each other's yards, plus it was only about 3 feet tall. We heard nothing for about a week and wondered whether or not it even bothered her. Our suspicions were answered one day by one of our neighbors who stopped by to tell us that Claudia had lost her literal mind over it. She wanted it gone, but it stayed for more than 3 years right in the same spot. Of course, we left Jojo's other doghouse right where it had always been. Jojo didn't use it anyway. She was half Labrador and would literally sleep in the rain. She was a doofus. After credits info, our battles with Claudia were far from over after this incident. Within a year, we found out that she was complaining to neighbors about my truck, a late 70s Ford with a V8. It wasn't a year or the way it looked, it was the fact that I left every day at about 5:30 am and our driveway was right under her bedroom. Well, this was an easy fix. Later that week, I had my muffler removed and a straight pipe installed. The state where we lived had no restrictions against it. By the way, that must be a lovely state. I also began starting my truck at 5:15 and letting it warm up for 15 minutes instead of leaving immediately. Oddly, we heard no more major complaints after that, just the occasional stuff about our yard, etc. After about another 6 months or so, it all came to an end. I came home one drizzly afternoon to find Claudia waiting by our driveway. She was very upset and asking me for my help. Her house was flooding. I had her lead me inside and saw what was happening. I told her I couldn't fix the problem, she would need a plumber, but I could definitely stop the water. I went outside over to our garage and fetched my water key that hooks up to the valve for the city's water main in front of everyone's house. I then shut her water off right as my wife was pulling in the driveway. Claudia thanked me and I followed my wife inside. "What was all that about?" she asked. I explained and my wife was kind of shocked that she would reach out to me, of all people. I thought nothing of it, but shortly thereafter, we found out that Claudia had stopped complaining about us. In fact, we never heard a single other complaint ever again. Weirder still, she started actually being nice. She would say hello in a pleasant, cheerful manner, and from that day forward she was a great neighbor. Fairly quickly, I stopped torturing her with my truck and removed the doghouse. I kept it in the garage for a while, in case it was a trick, but I never needed it again. And Ripe Stars, I gotta say, that story made me think, what if at some point or another you can be so nice to an awful neighbor that this person basically has no other way than to also be nice to you in the future? As we heard in a previous story, killing them with kindness is definitely a viable way of confronting a-hole neighbors. And the next one is a little bonus malicious compliance story. Another person's tale of ruthless management IT restrictions that make no sense reminded me of my own malicious compliance for computers. Here is my tale. When I was a young engineer, I worked for a consumer product company doing process development work. After a year or so there, they finally cobbled together a comprehensive IT plan. Vice presidents and above were allowed laptops, technical people got workstations. Except I traveled up to 50% of the time. So I often went a week without computer access, and meanwhile I would see VPs traveling who would leave their laptop behind when they did. One of the aforementioned VPs would handwrite notes on printed emails to you and send them via inter-office mail. My inside guy said that IT didn't want marketing to have laptops because they were flighty and lost / had too many stolen ones. This was also pre-9/11 when getting a laptop stolen at airport security was a thing. This same IT guy had also told me that IT didn't want anything to do with my industrial computers and systems. He was adamant that it wasn't in his budget or expertise. October came around and I hatched a plan. I had a particular process that needed temperatures to be taken. It was a pretty simple thing, 4 output streams and you could measure them by hand. I figured why not automate it. I priced out a decent laptop and a simple serial data logger from Omega. I checked my budget lines and found out that I had a few accounts with money to move around. Armed with my quotes, I go down to the comptroller's office and ask her to cut a PO for me. She smiled at me and said, "You wouldn't be trying to buy a laptop, would you?" "No, it's a data logger. It's basically a thermometer." "Oh, I see." Let me check to see if there are other budget spots open and I will get back to you. Later on she called me down to her office. Make sure you get a thermometer that doesn't go obsolete and has all the thermometer software you need. I was good friends with the comptroller because I had the ability to spend money at a moment's notice. See, when other people around the building did not use their budget or all of it by year's end, that money would be surrendered back to corporate. Then the next year would roll around and you would have to fight to get it back, much less increased. So there was always a push to use the budget up so the overall budget did not shrink. So I asked her how much could I spend. I think you need to write a capital request. I can find 5,000 or 6,000. So I went and spec'd the best, fastest laptop I could. I titled the request Continuous Data Acquisition and Process Monitoring System. I stuck all the temperature probes, DAC board and other specs under the request sheet. I found every technical sheet I could and padded the folder for the request to make it look like $5,000 worth of equipment. I put a single line for industrial computer at the end. At the level of request, it only needed to be signed by my boss, her and the division head. My boss knew exactly what I was up to, and her signature generally meant a rubber stamp by the division head. After everything came, I set it up, ran a few tests on my process and got enough data to analyze 1,000 times over. As was customary, we put inventory tags on it, citing the CAR number and a simple description of thermo. I ended up having to travel to one of our plants, so I went down to IT guy. Hey, can you put Lotus Notes on here so I can get my email while I travel? Wait, where did you get a laptop? It's not just a laptop, I use it for data logging. It's a thermometer, as I pointed to the inventory tag. He started laughing. And that is how I spent over $5,000 in the mid-90s on a thermometer. And the next one is titled Neighbor Had My Brother's Car Towed on Our Property. I am pretty annoyed because this happened just a few hours ago. Anyway, to set the stage, the players are me, my neighbor, who from here on in will be referred to as Nosy Old Bat, NOB for short, and yes, she is an entitled boomer. Her husband, nice neighbor, my brother, mentioned rather than involved, and my grandmother. For some backstory, NOB and I both live on corner houses next to a busy street, which is relevant to the story. And oh man, is this lady bordering on r/insane people level of crazy and nosy, because oh my god, she is nuts. I have lived in this house my entire life with my grandmother. I am 28 and where I live it is hard to live on your own, especially in the virus pandemic situation going on now and being temporarily out of work because finding work that is disabled accommodating is a pain. Especially when you have asthma and people are paranoid that an asthmatic has the virus. I get it, but it is tiring to explain that no, I don't have the virus, I have asthma and I cannot infect anyone with my bad lungs. And NOB used to watch me for a little bit when I was 6 until my aunt could pick me up to babysit me. This apparently has given her the mindset that she can attempt to control my life and tattle on me to my grandma, who nowadays knows when I have company, and if a friend parks in the driveway, I call or text her to let her know and ask her to let me know when she will be home so I can tell my friend that they need to move their car, unless grandma tells me that it is fine and she will park on the side of the street, which she does occasionally even if there's no one in the driveway. A non-issue, right? Not to OB. She has been known to get up in my business to go and knock on my door and demand to know who is there, and if I am doing the nasty with those friends, I am asexual, so it is hilarious to me when people ask if I am sleeping around, but it is infuriating when NOB asks this because she is nosy AF and thinks she practically owns the neighborhood due to the aforementioned corner houses and acts as if this is an HOA. It is not, thank everything, and she is in charge, as should we be because of our house on the other corner. She makes calls on other people's behalves constantly, we are no different. Anyway, dressing the stage aside, the story of the title. Alright, so my little brother is a Marine and is currently deployed in Hawaii, and his car has been on our property for a while now because, well, he cannot come and drive it since he is in Hawaii. This apparently gives her the idea to call a tow truck because it has not been moved since he left it. It is not even a terrible looking car either, but I guess it annoyed her that it was sitting there due to it being a car she did not know. My grandmother's now dead truck has been there longer, but NOB knows whose it is because she has seen her drive it. This happened between the time my grandma and I left for Costco and the time we got home. NOB called the towing company to tow my brother's car because in her batty old boomer logic, after my grandma went over to her house to confront her,
"It has been there for over 2 weeks and it is just sitting there."
on our property, not hurting anything. Her husband, nice neighbor, as crotchety as he can be, was unaware his wife did this because he likely was not home, so he had said that he wasn't sure when he talked to us. So now my grandma has to call the police and the towing company to get the car back, and she is rightfully furious, as am I, about this because it means another towing fee that was completely unnecessary. She cannot even get it until tomorrow because nothing is even open. She was met with voicemails of the towing not even being open either, which was bizarre before 7 PM, but whatever, I don't know the towing hours since we haven't had to deal with that before. I absolutely hate NOB with a seething and unholy passion because this is not the first time she has attempted this garbage either. She has done this on other neighbors because she thinks she can police the neighborhood because of her corner house logic. I don't care how rude this makes me, but I will not be paying that towing fee and I will not be letting my grandma pay it. NOB will be paying that because it was none of her business to be nosing her old face into things. I don't care if you are old, you don't stick your nose in someone else's business and life. Especially if the thing in question is on someone else's property, I will take this woman to court if she refuses to pay for this because she had no right to do this. I mean, what was my brother supposed to do? Be all like,
"Oh hey guys, it's been 2 weeks, let me go back to my grandma's and drive my car around the block. I'll be back on Monday with all the flights."
Yeah, as if his CO would allow for that just because of NOB. I will give updates if anything further happens because yeah, I'm furious and don't really care if the old woman does not want to pay it, she will or face court for her nosiness. Update, my cranky and tired butt marched over to her house, she was awake and outside, and ripped a new one into her about keeping her nose in her own stuff and to pay for the towing, or I was gonna take it higher up and nail her for illegally having it towed. She is paying for the tow truck reluctantly. I have not slept, thanks insomnia, you're a pal, so I have no Fs to give about being cordial or polite with this. Entitled people need to mind their own business and leave people alone. And ripe stars, with this we have unfortunately reached the end of today's video. However, if you cannot get enough of my stories, then I would highly suggest you to check out my endless binge watch playlist, which will show up at any moment in the left corner of the screen, which includes over 1000 ripe stories. In addition, if you would like to share one of your own stories, then please head on over to r/ripe stories on Reddit, where you can post your own story and there is a good chance that I might read it in a video. In addition, please also check out my Patreon at patreon.com/ripeyoutube for more than 50 exclusive Reddit videos that you won't find on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, your daily support is very much appreciated and I hope to see you again tomorrow.